Hi, it's Kendall here. Do you love humanity? Would you like to stop? Do you hate humanity and would like more reasons to do so? Well, boy, have I got a documentary for you. This was not the plan this week. I ended up getting sucked into watching one episode of a documentary called Worst Ex Ever. And then I watched two, and then I watched three, then I watched four, and now we're here, baby. I have yet to see a documentary so fully frustrate me in a very long time, probably since I watched Abducted in Plain Sight. There's just so much dangerous incompetence going around, and a lot of examples about why doing the right thing in the case of SA or DV doesn't guarantee that anything will be done by it. Basically, somebody on Twitter said that the alternative title for this documentary should be Police Don't Do Shit, because every single case is someone doing what they're supposedly supposed to do and nothing happening. I'm gonna tell you each of the stories from Worst Ex Ever and be mad. Communally. If you haven't seen it already and you don't want me to spoil it, feel free to watch it. It's a 4-part series. It's a true crime documentary and it's 4 different cases, right? So with that in mind, there's violence, DV, assault of all kinds, suicide. Yeah, and a lot of, again, people who are supposed to know what they're doing dropping the ball. I am hot. I feel like so hot. I feel so like physically angry. And that's what drove me to making this video, because I need a comment section to yell with me. Actually, before I get started, let's send it over to ad roll Kenny, because obviously I'm hot and I need a minute to simmer and sit before he gets started. So let's send it over to ad roll Kenny. Thank you. Hello everyone, this is Admiral Kenny, and today's video is sponsored by Warby Parker, baby. Warby Parker is the creator of these here gorgeous spectacles. They make beautiful and impactful designer quality eyewear, whether it's eyeglasses or sunglasses, or if you're going in to get an eye exam, Warby Parker has got you covered, so you can get your exams done there as well. I've actually had mine done there on my own money, on my own time, and I've never had such a quick and effective eye exam in my life. Look at me, aren't I stylish and have 20/20 vision cause I got an exam. Little sky blue moment. Who says that just because I have terrible eyesight, I can't be a sight to see? I thought of that as Warby Parker's glasses start at $95 and include prescription lenses with anti-reflective, scratch-resistant coating. That is so hard for me to say. You can go in person to try on glasses or use their virtual try-on options. And you can also buy new glasses knowing that you're helping the greater good, because for every pair sold, Warby Parker distributes a pair of eyeglasses to someone in need via their Buy a Pair, Give a Pair program. And as of 2023, they have distributed 15 million glasses. Yay! If you would like to check out Warby Parker, feel free to click on the link down below or use this here QR code over my big noggin to get 15% off when you order 2 or more pairs, both online and in store. Big thanks again to Warby Parker for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get on to the debauchery. Like I said, it's a 4-part documentary series and each follows a different case. Being that it is called Worst Ex Ever, the crux of each of the issues is essentially intimate partner violence, abuse in a myriad of ways. If you think the documentary itself might be too much for you, but you feel like maybe me talking about it, I'm not going to show anywhere near as graphic as the things that they show in the documentary. Maybe this is a good like middle ground to be a jumping point. Talk about these more triggering topics, but it's not hopefully re-triggering you. You know what's best for you. Viewer discretion, consider that. But I have so much fire and vitriol within me. I think by the end of episode 3, I had fire coming out of my ears, out of my eyes, out of my asshole. I was aflame. I was pissed. So sit back, relax, and be annoyed with me. I need a drink. Okay, I got a Coke Zero and my Totoro hoodie. I'm ready. Episode 1. So this episode is the tale of Ben Foster, a man who abused women. Those women were ignored by police, and only when he went on the run that resulted in the death of 2 people did they consider, oh, maybe we should take this guy a little bit more seriously. It opens in January of 2023 with the discovery of an unconscious woman named Justine by her friend Angie, and Angie is being interviewed. Justine had called Angie's mom saying that she was in trouble and she needed to go to the hospital. So Angie had taken it upon herself to call the police and make her way over to her house. The door was locked, which was unusual for her, and she could hear banging on the inside of the house by Justine. Cries of help, which let her know that she was still alive, but she was obviously in imminent danger. Eventually, she was able to get into the house via the garage, and that is where she sees Ben Foster, the man that Justine had been seeing for a few months, coming out of the home, basically saying that Justine had just suffered a heart attack and needed to go to the hospital. Immediately, Angie is like, well, why didn't you call a hospital? But he's like, don't worry, I'm gonna go get the car ready, go inside and get her, and we can take her to the hospital. Only for him to make a run for it at that point. Upon entering the house, Angie would see Justine's unconscious body, where she had been beaten, strangled within an inch of her life, and supposedly tortured for several days. Luckily, Justine was still alive, but she was definitely in critical condition upon coming to the hospital. She was actually in a coma. Angie, who had known that Justine had recently started seeing Ben Foster, would give his name to the police and also tell them that he had been arrested for similar abusive behavior in Las Vegas several years prior. We are sent back to that case, which would be against a woman named Amber, who had dated him on and off between 2012 and 2018. Amber, who met him while he was working at the same bar or something that she was also working at, would find that she really liked him because he was attractive, he was tall, he was smart, superficially, all these things that are great on paper. A few red flags I noticed immediately. 1, he wanted to be in law enforcement. 2, he was really into guns, knives, and the outdoors.
He had this weird, practice knife that he used to mess around and pretend to, slit my throat.
Over the course of their relationship, things would get progressively more and more tense until one day things actually got violent, where he ended up slapping Amber across the face. Now, as many would say, Amber needs to do the right thing. Tell the police immediately. So what does she do? She does exactly that. She breaks up with them, tells them that he had struck her, and then he's able to sit in jail for a few months. But upon his release, there's no procedure to keep her safe, so he would begin stalking her. That would escalate until one day he comes to her home and attacks her with a knife, nearly cutting off her pinky. She is luckily able to get away and able to escape to the leasing office of her apartment, where they call the police. And when the police arrive, they find Ben Foster, who had taken the liberty of cutting his own face and claimed that she had attacked him, actually. Now, despite him having a record for having assaulted her a mere few months prior, and despite him being in her apartment with a knife, they don't look into any of that and instead arrest Amber on suspicions of her attacking him with a deadly weapon.
I could not understand how me, covered in my own blood with defensive wounds all over me, how they could put me in handcuffs and try to take me to jail.
Luckily, she had a judge who was looking over her case, a woman, notably, who said, did y'all look into his shit? He has a history of violent attacks towards her. And eventually she's able to get out of jail relatively quickly, only to find that he had stolen every belonging of hers out of her apartment when she got back. Slightly overlapping with Amber, Ben would start seeing a woman named Jamie from the years of 2017 to 2021. They would meet at a Krav Maga class, martial arts of some sort class, and would strike up a pretty casual relationship for the most part. That was fine for her. She didn't really want anything deeper with him, especially because he seemed to be very much so still fixated or thinking about his exes. Amber. During this time, he was also reaching out to Amber, trying to rekindle their relationship or make amends, saying that he had gone to therapy, and part of his therapy was to make amends with people that he had hurt in the past. And unfortunately, Amber would give him the chance to say those apologies, and they were able to form somewhat of a amicable friendship of sorts.
It's kind of like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, so you in turn start feeling bad for them.
Eventually, he would end up attacking her again, strangling her until she passed out, but she was able to escape by jumping off her first-story balcony, and eventually he is arrested and the state presses charges on her behalf. Now, they were supposed to go on trial for this assault, but that kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and during this time, he would end up moving in with Jamie. She would say that he had fallen on a series of bad and unfortunate events, and she was trying to help him out. They were still casual, but you know, you seem to be going through a hard time. You can stay here here for a bit. She was under the impression that this is not a permanent thing. You're not coming to live with me. I'm just helping someone who's fallen on hard times. Well, he would eventually become progressively more violent to the extent that she was so afraid of him, she did not go back to her own fucking home throughout the week. She started staying at hotels to avoid him. That is making me so enraged. I don't know what it is about that particular part. That's your home. That's your comfort. And this motherfucker brought his big head ass in there. Oh! That is your house. That is your comfort. That is your dog. That he take over your house and put his hands on you because he starts getting more and more violent again. Burn him alive. Burn him alive. Eventually, she does what everyone says is the right thing to do. She goes to the police and files a restraining order against him. And not only does she file it, they go to serve it to him at her home. And she asks, well, what happens if he doesn't answer the door? And they're like, nothing. What do you mean nothing? Okay. Can you escort me back into my home, for my safety? I would like to not get beaten up upon entering my home. Nah, we don't do that. Eventually, she would take her chances, go back into her own home and fall asleep in her bed, only to be awakened with him restraining her and shaving her head bald. And this will be the beginning of what would be a several-week kidnapping in which he restrained her in the home, either with physical restraints or by gunpoint. Throughout, of course, he would be physically attacking her until one day they would run out of food, which would mean that they would have to go out to get some. All of her cards were maxed out. So he takes her with him, I guess, in an effort to not have her run away at the house. And he, who didn't give a fuck about people, but really loved her dog. Honestly, that tracks. Goes to walk the dog to get her to pee. And during that time, she's able to escape. She's able to run into a nearby grocery store and out the back of that grocery store, and eventually ends up in the backseat of a stranger who was kind enough to take her to the hospital. There, the police are called. They ask her who did this to her. And because, as we've seen, when she went to the police, it did not help. If anything, it escalated things. She's not feeling particularly safe with the help of police if she gives his information over. She was like, I don't feel like y'all are going to be able to keep me safe. But eventually they're able to get his name and they have a search warrant to search the home and they are able to arrest him. It became closer time for him to go to trial, but Jamie did not want to testify or be in the same presence as him because that's incredibly triggering and traumatizing. She says there's more than enough physical evidence. You have hella pictures. You have my testimony. Why do I need to physically be in the same space as him? And because she was not willing to be in the same area as him while he stood trial, there was no victim. And because there was no victim, the DA cut him a deal so that he only had to serve 30 months for both his attack of Jamie and Amber. I don't know how Amber got pushed into that too. I guess they never handled her case either, so they just clumped them together. And the time he had sat in jail awaiting trial, he only had to serve 6 months for nearly killing 2 women. Here we go. And it's between the years of 2021 and 2023. And we have Justine, the woman who was attacked in the very beginning of this episode. After being released from jail, Ben ends up in Oregon, which is where his family is from. And this is where he would brutalize Justine, and now he was on the run. Luckily, his parents were pretty helpful with the police. This is not funny, but they go to the parents and are like, yeah, this is what he did. And they're like, oh my God, well, no, honestly, he's the type of to do that. He did it in Vegas.
And she is in really, really, really bad shape.
Oh my God.
Well, that's what happened in Vegas.
They give as much help as they can to where he may possibly be. They theorize that he might go back to Vegas. But eventually they would find that he had gone into the woods of rural Oregon, was on dating apps trying to find either a place to stay and or his next victim. And they would go on a several day manhunt looking for him, was able to find him when he tried to use an old man's name and credit card to get a taxi or an Uber or something. And it's a small area, it's a rural area. The taxi knew that the person that was signing on was older and was not likely this person that was calling for this taxi.
The cab driver knew that Richard was an older male And per the cab driver, it was like, this guy did not sound old.
Lo and behold, Ben had broken into the home of an elderly man and killed him and his caretaker and stayed in his apartment during the manhunt. Eventually, he would make his way back to Justine's home, and that is where there is a standoff where he crawled into the crawl space of her house and eventually himself. He would succumb to his wounds. Thank God. You burn in hell. Luckily, Justine would survive her injuries, but she would leave with many a broken bone, having to learn how to walk again, get new teeth because he had broken them all. She said that the history she had with him was that they both worked at the same bar, and one day he had been asking around for clean urine from one of his coworkers, and this stood out to Justine because why do you need clean urine? She would look up his record, find out all the things that he did violently in Vegas, and then tell their boss that he is someone that has a history of violence against women. Are you sure you really want him to be controlling alcohol in a bar? That would ultimately lead to him getting fired. He came to her home, tortured her, kidnapped her, beat her for several days as an act of revenge. Basically, the episode ends with Amber, the first woman he had attacked, saying, if only they had taken my story seriously.
If they would have taken my story and Jamie's story more seriously, they could have prevented this from happening to her, and they could have saved 2 lives.
I know, right? But yeah, that's episode 1. You good? You're not. Wait for episode 2. The year is 2006, and we meet a woman named Simona, who is originally from Guyana, South America. I was about to say South Africa. Her family had immigrated to New York when she was 11, and she had had so much drive and ambition. She was a very hard worker to the extent that it was kind of like detrimental, honestly. She was working at a Morgan Stanley while simultaneously trying to open a Golden Crust restaurant. If you've ever had Golden Crust, so good. It's a fast food Jamaican chain. If you've never heard of it, fire. So yeah, she had her job. She had this business that she was opening. She was also a single mother of a little girl. So she had a lot on her plate, and everything kind of fell to a standstill when she ended up being very emotionally vulnerable after the death of her father, who actually died of suicide. During this very emotionally sensitive and vulnerable time, she would end up meeting a man named Jerry. Jerry was a police officer with the NYPD, and he would say that he would work in the general area, so he would come to her restaurant, the Golden Crust, several times a week. Eventually, they would strike up a friendship and then start dating. Everything would be well and good for the first few years until suddenly, one day, she gets a call from a woman claiming to be Jerry's wife, saying that he is married and has 2 kids. Also, he's not a cop. I'm sure he's lying to you saying he's a cop. He's not a cop. So, shaken up by all of these lies, she confronts him. And eventually, despite him trying to be like, it's not blah, 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 she breaks up with him. It's done. She's over it. One day, he would come to her home under the pretense of returning her house keys, only for him to then attack and essay her immediately afterward, begging her not to tell. But she does the right thing that people say, this is what you gotta do. She goes immediately to the authorities and gets a kit done. He's arrested. His bail was set at $100,000 and his mom paid it. And so he was just out and about. The trial for the assault ends up being pushed in every direction because of logistics. So several years pass and nothing is done. He's just out and about living his life until one day, as the trial day gets closer and closer, Simona is arrested. It would seem that 3 people had claimed that a woman that fit her description had robbed them at gunpoint while impersonating an officer. 2 of them had picked her out of a lineup, and when she was there getting interrogated, she noticed that Jerry's picture was in the folder of whatever they were using to interrogate her. She brings it up, and they say, he has nothing to do with this. Don't worry about that. We're talking about what you've done. I didn't do that shit. What are you talking about? Eventually, after realizing what they accuse her of, is specifically the impersonating an officer thing, she's like, well, this is definitely Jerry. He's trying to discredit me because his trial for my assault is coming up. Did anyone look into that? No, not a damn person looked into that shit. They send her to jail with $1 million bond, notably 10 times more than the person that assaulted her because she impersonated an officer and robbed them of like $1,200. That's the accusation. And so because she doesn't have $1 million, she sits in jail for months.
I lost everything I worked for, every single thing. When I found out that the house was gonna go into foreclosure, I was angry. It was always going to be mine, I guess, or in the family type of thing. That house is the house I came into this country and I lived in.
Now, despite there being video evidence of her not being in the state on one of the days she supposedly robbed somebody, they don't give a f. They said it's too blurry. We can't tell that that's you. And sure, your phone is pinging from Connecticut. We don't give a f. You sitting in jail, bitch. That isn't to say that there weren't some people that were aware of the something weird going on and believing that Jerry had something to do with it. He actually had a close friend at the time who would ultimately come to police and say, hey, he'd been going around asking if people would work with him to set his ex up.
I overheard him saying something about the plan to frame Simona.
He was offering like $20,000 to people who would be willing to corroborate a story where she would be seen not credible and would go to jail.
I know you did. You said that Simona robbed you, which you know is a lie. Oh yeah, I feel bad about it. I want to tell him the truth too.
Which, wild that you would find not only one person who would be willing to do this for less than $1 million, but he found 3. This man would ultimately end up in jail too because they claimed that Simona had put him up to defending her and that he participated in witness tampering. So now 2 that did nothing wrong are in jail. Eventually, though, they're able to come out when a third person, a woman named Sophia, basically says he's been going around trying to pay people $20,000 to put his ex-girlfriend in jail. They decide to believe this woman, thank God, or she just picked the right officer that ended up interviewing her. But they were able to put together that Jerry, though he was not a police officer, he was an NYPD informant. Therefore, knowing all of the ins and outs of, well, not all of them, but a lot of ins and outs of procedure and insight on how the police goes about things. He was able to create this very wild and winding scheme to get her in jail and for his rape charges to be thrown out. The police would flip his co-conspirators so that they would get lesser sentences and rat out Jerry. They eventually let out the friend that knew everything as well. And Jerry is eventually sentenced to 32 years in prison. Simona, after 194 days in prison on a charge that she did not do, was able to be released, and she was able to sue Nassau County for $2 million because there was evidence that they had known a connection between her and Jerry and actively ignored it. Episode 3. This was the one, like, all of them are bad. Don't get me wrong. All of them are just like, wow, oh my God. But this one was particularly whoa, because I did not expect that going on at the end. This is the story of a man named Eric, who is this shy, kind of nerdy dude, and he ends up marrying a woman named Rosa. He had actually met Rosa through her mother, May. They were actually co-workers. And though Rosa was definitely, a bit shy and awkward, so was he. He was definitely nerdy, shy guy, but he was, nice and everything. Hi, Russet. Why are you on your toes? What's up? His friends and family would kind of say the vibes are a little off with Rosa. Like, she wouldn't talk to them. She would talk through Eric. Like, she would whisper to Eric and he would say what she said.
Rosa was always listening in, and he had like a code word just to let me know that she was listening in. It was just odd.
It's very weird. They were like, she's a little off, but hey, whatever. They end up married in 2004, and all of his extended family was very, very excited about it, especially his grandmother, Sally. Sally was, at this point in her mid to late 80s, she was getting up in age, and she was super excited to see the birth of her own great-grandchild. He was very close with his grandmother. Pretty quickly after getting married, Eric would be forced to cut ties with all of his family by Rosa. in some way or another. Eventually, she ends up slowly but surely isolating him, and he would just cut off all ties with all friends and family. She does have some signs of being violent pretty early into the marriage. She had tried to punch him in the face a week after their honeymoon, but missed. She was kind of a loose cannon. She was always a little bit agitated. There was always a lot of fear about what would take her off, what would trigger her. In many ways would financially abuse Eric. He would be working 2 jobs overtime in a way to appease her. Again, she was always angry and frustrated. Eventually, she would get pregnant in the year 2006 and have their child. And within months of having the child, Rosa was threatening divorce. Fights were getting more and more intense. And eventually, she would just take off with their daughter.
At this point, Rosa had complete control of all of our assets. I had nowhere to go.
Which will result in him being homeless, so he goes to move in with Grandma Sally, who is more than willing to open her arms to him, even though he had effectively excommunicated himself from the rest of his family. So that was very kind of her. On their daughter's first birthday, Eric pleads with Rosa to see their child, which she denies, and this makes him decide he wants to start suing for custody. Upon hearing this, Rosa would email his job and say that he had stopped taking his depression medication and had threatened to shoot up the job. Upon hearing this, they decide to suspend him until they can do a investigation, and in the midst of their custody battle, it was not a good time to lose a job. Eventually, after months though, they would find that there was no evidence that that was the case. He was psychologically evaluated and that never happened, and so he's able to come back to work, and eventually he's able to get cleared and get 50% custody of their child. When that was the case, Rosa decided to call the police and accuse him of sexually assaulting their child in an effort to take away his custody. Upon investigations, it was pretty obvious that that had not happened. And not only did she not take his rights away, it would incrementally result in him getting more and more percentage custody, because each time she came with a bullshit claim, they would just give him more custody. Now, Grandma Sally had a boyfriend. She was dipping it and doing it at 91. Hello. She had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend's name was Lester. And they were always spending time together. He would be at their house or she would go over there. And if they weren't physically together, they had a very regimented schedule with which they would phone call each other. One day, Lester goes to call for their phone call and she doesn't answer. Calls back, he calls back. He's getting progressively more worried because this is very unlike her. Now, she's an old woman. She's 91 at this point, so, and not in the best health. So there was concerns that maybe she had had a heart attack, something had happened. So he was very nervous and decides to call his son and his son's wife, so his daughter-in-law, to go and check on her. When they get there, so does Eric end up there with their daughter. And they're like, hey, have you heard from your grandmother? They get in and Eric can't find Sally anywhere. But who he does run into is May. Now, there's no reason for May to be in Grandma's house. So I can imagine that was quite alarming. But he's like, what are you doing here? And she was like, oh, she called me over. Where is she? She's in the garage, which is not normal for her. He reluctantly goes to see where his grandmother was, only to find Rosa in a black trench coat and a taser. She would tase him, and May would come behind him and beat him with a baton. They would assault him together with several weapons, putting the child who was in the room in a bathroom while they beat him, and eventually would hold him at gunpoint, saying to give up custody of the child or we will shoot you. He is forced to say he will. But before anything can happen there, remember, Lester's son and daughter-in-law were there as well, and they had heard the commotion and ran out for their own safety, going to a neighbor's house who called the police. The police get there, don't know what's going on. They just see two people like arguing, a lot of commotion, and they tell everyone to freeze. Eric is like, she's pointing a gun at me, I can't freeze, so he's still moving until eventually they shoot him with a taser. He goes down. They find May, they find Rosa, everybody is arrested. Everyone has injuries. He was defending himself and everybody has injuries. Eric is obviously distraught, but he's like, where is my daughter? Where is my grandmother? It became pretty clear that May and Rosa were the aggressors here. A, what were you doing at his grandma's house uninvited? There's no evidence that she invited you over. They would find a revolver in Rosa's trench coat. Grandma Sally was nowhere to be found in her own home. She was 91. Where the f was she going? She couldn't drive. And eventually they would find Grandma Sally's body face down in sheets within a garbage can in the garage. These bitches killed his grandmama, the woman and her mama. This bitch killed his grandma. There was already evidence. I am shaking. There was already evidence that Rosa and May were the aggressors here, but it didn't help that they would end up finding very detailed written plans for what they were going to do to the grandma. The plan was that they were going to kill grandma and then force Eric to write a letter where he admits to killing grandma because grandma would confront him about assaulting the daughter. In a fit of rage, he would grandma and then, because of the guilt, would himself. With both of them dead, that would leave no one to take custody of the child except for May and Rosa. This was the plan, again, that they had written down, along with buying like a cartoon pack of kidnapping and murder equipment. They bought like a ninja star. They were doing target practice. Rosa was stalking him and finding his times of which he went to take their child to daycare, for instance, or left work and yada, yada, yada.
One of the main things that stood out from the forensic search on the computers was a Google search that said, how to murder.
Not the smartest bitches in the world. And they would go to jail for that. They caught them very quickly. Grandma Sally's boyfriend, Lester, would die less than a year after her murder. Of a broken heart, I guess. That's so sad. Like, these hoes, I swear to God. But with that said, Eric is doing better now. The daughter is like, what, 18 or so now? And she's growing up as well adjusted as you can, I guess. Happy ending? No. Episode 4. This is the story of Amanda and Kevin. In 2007, Amanda would meet a man named Kevin who was very attractive, very fit and athletic, sociable, flirty. They would meet at a Denny's and she would kind of curve him, but eventually would run into him again that weekend. And he insinuates that, oh, it's fate that we see each other. Let me get your number, yada, yada. They would shortly after that start dating. And her entire family really liked him, except for her younger sister, Alicia, nicknamed Punky. They would eventually get married. They would get pregnant and have 3 kids pretty quickly, one after another. But as the years went on, Kevin became more and more verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and she would consider leaving. But her family has a history of a bunch of marriages and divorce is just something you don't do. So when she brought it up, they'd be like, no, don't do that. Shut the f up. But as you can imagine, things get worse. And Kevin begins to be more and more controlling, more and more jealous. And this is a dynamic that her friends and family would start to pick up on. Right? This guy that was so amazing, suddenly we're starting to notice, even his friend started to notice. He would be like, stop looking at my woman. He's like, what the fuck? Like, people were starting to notice that he was getting progressively more possessive. Because of this emotional and verbal abuse, in 2016, Amanda would ask for a divorce. Because they didn't have the money to separate physically, she would end up staying in the home, but moving into a different bedroom. One day, he would break into that room, demanding to see her phone. The fight would escalate until he would punch her in the eye. Now, that's bad enough, but what makes it worse is that he was also a trained boxer. So he left a really bad black eye. Stunned, she sits there as he brings a towel, wipes off her face, gives her a hug, and then goes to work. She moves out but doesn't report it. As we can see, ain't no point in judging her. You see why someone might not do it. And she decides to cease all communication with him outside of what pertains to their children. During these conversations, he would beg her to come home, beg her to take him back, which again, she was not open to. So he says that he will go to court, get full custody, get alimony from her, and if he's not allowed to get those things from court, he was going to kill her. Lo and behold, in 2017, she is attacked in the dark as she's getting out of her car in her driveway. She is so badly beaten that she cannot see out of her eyes because they are bleeding. She goes immediately to the hospital and files a police report. And they say, well, did you see his face? And she was like, well, who the f else would it be? Who the f else would be hiding in my bushes after threatening to kill me to try to kill me? They said, well, you didn't see him, so we're not arresting him. But she does decide to sue, I guess, for the 2 assaults and get a protection order against him. The protection order would automatically include their children, so he's not allowed to see any of them. He would try to sue her for alimony and custody. He is denied. And also, they're like, no, you owe her child support. What the hell? And being that he said in this scenario he would try to kill her, the cops don't do shit. Fast forward, Amanda is working overtime to support her 3 children, and she had a nanny who would help take care of her kids when she wasn't home. And also her sister Punky would also assist the nanny to take care of the 3 kids. One day, Amanda just happens to be out of town for a conference type thing for her job when she finds out from her father that Punky had been shot to death. In the middle of the night, someone had come to the door and shot whoever had opened it, and that incidentally ended up being Punky. And immediately, Amanda knew, 1, Kevin had something to do with it. 2, it was an accident that Punky was killed. That was meant for me. If that weren't heartbreaking enough, one of their kids had actually seen the murder or seen parts of the murder. If only we had known. If only we had seen this coming. So it's pretty clear that Kevin has something to do with it. But being that he knows who Punky is, it was confusing as to how he had accidentally killed Punky. Like, he, as the brother-in-law, he would know who Punky is if he was going for Amanda. Amanda had already had 2 ongoing cases against Kevin for his assaults against her. And that just wasn't important, I guess, enough to police until there ended up being a murder in association with her. But until the murder, they weren't particularly speedy on that. But if they had been and done something about it, he'd be in jail. And none of this would have happened. Punky would still be alive. So they finally get on that and end up actually putting him in jail for 3 years for the assault that he had done, the 2 assaults that he had done prior to that.
But it was a 3-year sentence.
3 years. Right? 3 years is crazy. The murder of Punky would go pretty cold for a while until one day a tip comes in that a woman was gloating about how her and her boyfriend had killed a woman. Eventually it ends up being traced back to Kevin's cousin and his 15-year-old girlfriend. So obviously there's the connection to Kevin. They are able to look at his Snapchat because they Snapchatted the drive to Kevin's house prior to the murder. He paid them a total of $2,600 with the little girl, because that's what she is, the 15-year-old, getting $200. They both would flex that money, Bonnie and Clyde style, on Snapchat. And now that we have all the pieces together, it would be quickly known that Kevin had something to do with a conspiracy to kill Amanda, but they had accidentally killed Punky, barely looking at who the person was they were supposed to be killing anyway. Very smart people, as you can tell already prior to this. They would go to trial, and the cousin and his girlfriend would plead guilty. Kevin, weirdly enough, would plead not guilty despite all the evidence associating him with it. He would claim that he was not guilty because he was simply bemoaning his issues with the divorce to his family, and they took it upon themselves to act on his behalf. Lo and behold, that didn't hold up, and he got charged with first-degree murder and will be in there for life. Amanda is now a DV advocate. She actually helped pass some legislation that includes coercive control within the definition, the legal definition of domestic violence, but she'll never have her sister back. And all of this could have been solved if police did their jobs. I don't know what I want to say at the end of this video, because that's the end of that episode and ultimately the end of this video. I just feel like I've never felt such immense and holistic frustration. Just episode after episode after episode of motherfuckers dropping the ball. Yeah, this shit had me hot. Did you watch it? You mad? Put it down in the comment section. Be mad with me. Be pissed with me. And yeah, if you like this video, like it or whatever, I'm just really hot right now. Follow me on all my social media, Instagram and Twitter, both of which are KennieJD. Subscribe to hear me bitch about other things, hopefully lighter things next time. And I will see you guys next time. Right? It's bullshit, ain't it?